Okay, we're going to take a look at starting your site plan. We don't want to delete what we have already created. And the site plan is only done on one story. I'm going to use the story that has my garage, and that is my recommendation. But you are not stuck to using that story. And instead of creating just slabs, we're going to create meshes. Meshes will allow us to change elevation. We want to create pitch or a contour to the land, to the driveway, and we're going to take a look at that here to start. In the end, I do not want to delete my title block. I want this later on. Yes, we're going to have to make it bigger, but for right now, I'm just going to move this off to the side. There is no sense in deleting this all together. So there's kind of step one. Next, I got to remember that I have to be under 2 acres of land for the design requirements that we looked at earlier. To do this, you can create the zone, change the zone label to tell you square footage. We cannot have the zone label tell us number of acres. It only tells us square footage. Well, there are 43,560 square feet in an acre. So this calculation does have to be made manually. So if you want to start off and just kind of figure out, well, first, one thing that we have to concern ourselves with are easements and setbacks. And this does change by municipality, but we're going to go with just a 30-foot setback, which means our property line cannot be any closer than 30 feet. So this is the minimum distance away from my exterior walls that I could create my site. We'll talk about this more when I'm back in class. But this is the minimum distance away. Again, you have 2 acres, but this is the minimum that I could work with. I plan to use a little bit more than this overall dimension. But again, just based on our setback requirement that I am setting forth, we have to be at least 30 feet away. So you could run your zone tool, change the zone label to show you square footage, and this could be as small as I create my property. This is going to be nowhere near 2 acres. So as you start to move lines, we're going to probably make this, or I'm going to make this much bigger. Easements are what the municipality has the right of way to. So I don't want to create my driveway within 10 feet of my property line. I don't want to put a pool, a deck, a patio within 10 feet of my property line. Again, this changes by municipalities, but we're just going to keep a even 10-foot measurement for right now. What I want to do is I want to create what's known as a mesh. If I'm going to create grass, if I'm going to create a driveway, a walkway, there most certainly may be areas that I want to be flat, that I want to be level. And most times it's actually not perfectly level. Like your driveway slopes a little bit just so water runs off. But I'm just expanding this out. Let's say this is how big I want my property to be. And this is just a guideline, so I'm not working too far outside of this. Again, you do have 2 acres, so you could keep changing this. But let's create a mesh. You could draw guidelines, but I do have the polyline method, the rectangular method to create the mesh. The mesh. At no point can the top be lower than the bottom, not even for a split second. My suggestion is to make the bottom of the mesh much thicker. I'm working on my first floor. I actually have a basement. I'll have to worry about where my egress windows are so I could turn my trace on. But I want to work down below this. So I just set 20 feet to start. My top elevation 0, when you create this, it creates just like a slab where I can add and subtract. I'm just getting this out of the way because I see it in my trace. Where I can add and subtract to it. In 2D, it's going to act just like a slab. So maybe you want to make rectangular sections. So let's say here's my driveway pad. I think that comes off my garage. I don't know why I'm not getting the guideline. There we go. I can add to this. Maybe I want my driveway to come down at an angle. I'll just switch to my polyline method instead of my rectangular method. And if my driveway fades out here, oops, sorry. And back to the starting point, I have a mesh. By default, the mesh is grass on top, which maybe you're going to start with grass. You do have a pavement option. It's here somewhere. Asphalt. But at each of these nodes on the mesh, I can change the elevation. I can drop these points down. It is the z-axis. And let's say I want a little slope here to my driveway. I'll drop this point 4 feet. And then I'll drop this point 4 feet. And I want this to keep going down. But at any point, if I bring this below, you should notice something's wrong. Like the thickness of the earth went away. So at no point can I bring this down lower. If I want this to drop further, I have to make this dimension lower. So that will make the ground thicker. And I'm going to drop this point down to where I want it. If you hover over another mesh point, you can have them line up in that vertical distance, that Z elevation. If you want more mesh points, like I only have these two, what if I want one somewhere around here? If I click on the edge, I can insert a new node. I can move this node around. I probably want a node on this side too, if I'm going to change the mesh points on both of them. Now I can go back here to 3D and I can start manipulating these elevations so that they match up. I want to have those corresponding mesh points. So if I think that's way too steep, I'll bring these back up. And I want to put a mesh in beside this somewhere. I want grass to be around the perimeter. So I'm going to come back to my mesh tool. I kept a minus 30 foot base elevation. So I'm just going to trace right around. And again, I can add to this. So maybe I don't want to put it all in at once. So now I have a mesh here that is my grass. But I have to change the elevation. So I got these corresponding mesh points. I can match these up by moving the z-axis. But I have this extra node here. I need to create that node on this mesh so I can line it up with the one from this mesh. So they don't quite line up. So I can take this mesh point. I can actually move this in 3D. I can move this mesh point to line up, and now I can change its elevation. I can drop it. So I want this to pitch away from the house. I've created grass that matches up to my driveway. So we'll add a little bit more here. We'll cut out for a front walkway or something, or a back walkway, I don't know. I'm just going to add big chunks at a time. I want to add rectangular method. I can get quite a bit pretty quickly. Well, one thing you might want are flower beds. So if I know that I want a flower bed in here, I can subtract, but now I have to create a new mesh. So I'll create a new mesh, and this one I'm probably just going to keep flat. I'm not going to change the elevation here much. So this one's here in the back of my house. We'll orbit around, but I want this one not to be grass, but to be mulch. It is here somewhere. I am in other. Maybe that's one we gotta load. Well, we'll just make it dirt for right now, since I'm not here today. We'll come back and change it later. But now I've filled that spot in. We'll take a look at making poles and patios and all of that. But just to get started, start laying out these meshes and make sure that you are under 43,560 square feet. Well, times 2. You have 2 acres. Save it. When you go to save this, don't save it as your floor plan. Save as. I want to create a site plan. If we ever have to come back and make a change, I'm just going to change the title of mine from floor plan to site plan. And I'll make the save.